Hi, I'm Marjorie. I raised my son alone after his father passed. I loaned him money when his business was dying, gave up my own future so he could have one. And last month, he accused me of stealing $70,000, money that was mine to begin with. Then his wife told me to leave that same night. No room, no explanation, just a packed bag by the door. The next morning, I had 37 missed calls. But what scared me most wasn't being kicked out. It was realizing they had been building this lie for a long time, patiently, quietly. They made me feel like family until they didn't. And when I disappeared, no one asked why. Would you? The morning sun filtered through the blinds, just enough to warm the corner of the guest room where my suitcase still sat, half-zipped, like it hadn't decided to unpack either. It had been a week since I moved into my son's home. Not permanently, just for a while, as Leland had put it. My lease had ended, and the idea of finding another apartment at 67 was more exhausting than liberating. Leland said they'd be happy to have me. Isolde smiled and nodded when I arrived, with that kind of smile that says, "Bless your heart," but not, "Come on in." I told myself this would be temporary. I told myself it was mutual, that I'd be helping them as much as they were helping me. But the house didn't echo those reassurances. It was pristine, with curated color palettes and lavender oil diffusers. There were no welcome mats, no soft blankets on the couch. The only photo in the hallway was a professional portrait of Leland, Isolde, and Cassian, no trace of Harlan or me. When I asked about hanging a small framed photo of Leland as a toddler, Isolde smiled tight and said, "We're going for a more minimal aesthetic these days." Later that day, I stepped outside to check the mail and paused. The box had two names engraved in brushed silver, Leland and Isolde Martin. My name wasn't there, not even taped. I remembered once, when Leland was 10, he wrote Mom and Me on the mailbox in Sharpie. I kept that box for years after we moved. That evening, we had dinner, just the three of us. Isolde had arranged everything down to the linen napkins, her voice floating over conversations about school fundraisers and work clients. As they sat down, I waited. There were 3 chairs, but only 2 had been set. I stood beside the table for a second, thinking someone would notice. When no one did, I went to the kitchen and dragged a chair over from the breakfast nook. It screeched across the tile, louder than anything else that night. Leland looked up briefly, then went back to slicing his chicken. I spent the next morning trying to feel useful. I offered to cook breakfast, something hearty, biscuits and eggs, the way Harlan used to like them. I was halfway through cracking eggs when Isolde entered, barefoot, clutching a smoothie. "Oh," she said, glancing at the skillet. "We actually just started a plant-based reset. I meal prepped everything for the week." I paused. "I figured I could handle one morning." "No, of course," she said quickly. "It's just, the kitchen is kind of the hub for our schedule. Maybe if you want to heat something up, we set up a microwave in the garage fridge nook. That way, you won't have to worry about overlapping routines." I nodded, even though I didn't understand what overlapping routines meant. I cooked the eggs anyway. Then I ate them in the garage, on a stool next to a shelf, stacked with yoga mats and unopened mail. By the weekend, I had learned which hours the house belonged to whom. Isolde had her online yoga classes from 7 to 9. Leland took conference calls late at night in the upstairs office. Cassian had tutoring Tuesdays and Thursdays, during which I was asked to keep the volume down, just in case he needed to concentrate. I didn't watch TV. I read books in my room, the one with bare white walls and a twin bed, where none of my quilts or framed photos made it out of the suitcase. I tried once to put up a calendar I had brought from my last apartment, just something familiar to mark the days. When I came back from a walk, it was gone. Isolde said she'd moved it to reduce clutter. I didn't ask where. I began to hear laughter at night, soft voices in the living room, the occasional clink of wine, glasses. I never knew if it was company or just them. I never felt invited to ask. That night I opened my sock drawer, which held more memories than clothes. At the bottom, tucked between an old watch and a letter from my sister, was a photograph. Leland, 6 years old, in overalls, holding a fishing rod with Harlan crouched behind him. I remembered that day at Lake Travis. Leland caught a fish the size of his hand and talked about it for months. I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb. No one had asked me how I was adjusting. No one had offered to move their things for mine. The microwave in the garage buzzed when I reheated soup later that night. It sounded like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. That night, I began to wonder if I had moved into my son's home, or if I'd stepped into a carefully crafted silence. The morning after that dinner, where I'd quietly pulled a chair for myself and swallowed the sharpness of being overlooked, I passed through the hallway and saw it. A new portrait hung there, large and backlit by a track light that made it impossible to miss. Leland, Isolde, and Cassian were arranged in coordinating navy tones, smiling like a Christmas card. It was framed in gold. I looked at it longer than I should have, blinking once, twice, then a third time to be sure what I already knew. I wasn't in it. There were no photos of me in this house. Not one. Not even in the room where I slept. I didn't mention it. I didn't point at it or ask why. I just stood there for a beat too long and moved on, like a housekeeper who knew not to linger. Later that week, Isolde hosted her friends from her branding group. They came in designer sneakers and oversized sunglasses, each one perfectly styled to look effortless. I stayed in the kitchen, as I usually did. It's funny how quickly that boundary sets in. You know where you're meant to stay, even when no one says it aloud. They were discussing podcasts and audience metrics when I heard one of them ask, "Is she your housekeeper?" There was a pause, then a nervous laugh from Isolde. "She's family." But it came out thin, stretched like plastic wrap over something that was starting to smell. I waited, hoping, maybe foolishly, that Leland would step in, that he'd say, "That's my mother," with pride or at least clarity, but he didn't. He just kept sipping his green tea like none of this had anything to do with him. A few days later, Cassian ran into my room after school, flopped on the bed, and said, "Grandma, look what I drew." My heart leapt before I could stop it, but from the hallway I heard Isolde call out, "Sweetheart, remember what we said. Just call her Marjorie." He hesitated. "Okay," he mumbled, then went back to coloring. That night, during dinner, one of Isolde's friends stayed longer. She asked a question about the remodeling plans, then looked my way and said, "And what do you think, Mr. Smelm? And moi, mon Sam, control." I blinker till and you're scared. I hadn't been called that since Harlan passed, not even at the bank. No one corrected her. No one said, "That's Leland's mom." Not even Leland. It settled over the table like condensation on glass, silent, fogging, everything. The next morning, I stood at the refrigerator looking at the calendar Isolde had meticulously organized. It was color-coded and laminated. There were orange blocks for Leland's Zoom meetings, green for Cassian's swim lessons, pink for Isolde's yoga, and content filming slots. I searched for blue, my color supposedly. There was nothing. I had added a small sticky note the day before. Dr. Patel, 11:30 a.m., Tuesday. It was gone. In its place, written in perfect cursive, was Yoga with Cass, 11:30. I took a smaller pen from my purse, the one I used to write checks, and quietly rewrote my appointment in the corner. Smaller, lower, where it wouldn't get in the way. As the days passed, I found myself withdrawing, not out of bitterness, but because I was learning the rules. I started spending more time in my room. Velda had lent me an old CD player, and I listened to audiobooks while I knit shawls that no one had asked for. I didn't go into the kitchen after 7 p.m. That's when Isolde lit candles and put on wind-down music. Once, Leland even said, "Try to keep it quiet after dinner, Mom. Isolde's decompressing." So I did. I read. I knit. I remembered. I remembered birthdays I never missed, fevers I stayed up all night through, math homework I barely understood, but sat beside anyway. I remembered a boy who once clung to my waist at the bus stop, crying because he thought the kindergarten teacher wouldn't like him. By the time dinner was served, I wasn't sure if I was still a mother or just a memory they hadn't yet deleted. The next morning, I noticed a piece of mail had fallen behind the kitchen basket, the one where Isolde sorted coupons and school notices. I bent to pick it up, and as I did, my eyes caught the corner of a paper sticking out from under a stack of printer pages on the counter. It had familiar digits, part of an account number I hadn't seen in years. My heart stalled. Harlan had memorized that number when he opened a savings account for us, long before online banking existed. And now, there it was, printed across a bank transfer form on Leland's desk, the top left corner stamped in a rush. I didn't take the paper. I didn't need to. A laptop sat open beside it. I moved quietly, just close enough to see the screen without touching it. On the monitor was a confirmation, $70,000 wired out of what looked like a business-linked joint fund. The name next to the account? Mine. I didn't react. I didn't storm into the hallway or demand answers. I simply walked back to my room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, where I let the silence fill me like it had so many nights before. A decade ago, Leland's first company was sinking. He had poured money into a marketing platform no one wanted and had nearly maxed out every credit line we didn't know about. He came to my door one night, panicked and ashamed. He said he was going to lose everything. He didn't ask for help directly, but I saw it in his eyes. I didn't hesitate. I cashed out half my retirement savings the next day. There was no paperwork, no repayment schedule. Just a breakfast at a diner off the I-35 where I slid the check across the table and he gripped my hand tighter than I expected. "Thank you," he whispered. "I'll make this right. I promise." Promises fade faster than ink. Last night, I heard Leland on the phone in the hallway. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. It's hard not to hear things in a house where every word echoes off bare walls. "I built all of this from scratch," he said. "Every single piece. I didn't get a handout like some people. I earned it." Silence followed. Then, softly, "Yeah, my mom helped a little, sure, but that was years ago. This is all me." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. But inside something collapsed, quiet and complete. The kind of collapse you don't show because nobody would notice it anyway. That night, I sat at the small desk by my window and began pulling threads together. The account I saw wasn't new. It was the same one Harlan created for us before he died. The same one I used to send Leland that money. And now, that very account was being accessed again, this time by people who never asked and clearly didn't plan to tell me. I wasn't sure if they thought I wouldn't notice or just assumed I couldn't. And there was something else, something in the pattern. The withdrawal wasn't random. It mirrored the exact amount I once gave to Leland. That can't be a coincidence. I wrote it down. I copied the transaction ID and stared at the numbers until they blurred. Something was happening behind my back, and whatever it was using my name as a stepping stone. Dinner that night was salmon and couscous. I picked at my plate, not from lack of appetite, but because I was too full of thoughts to eat. Isolde spoke between bites. So we're bringing on a financial consultant just to streamline things now that the business is scaling up. Leland nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. His fork scraped the plate. Cassian asked if he could be excused early. I glanced down at my hands, lined, freckled, a little dry. These hands once signed over the check that kept this house from foreclosure. They once held Leland's when he told me he was afraid he'd never make it in the world. No one thanked me at that table. No one acknowledged the past. I wasn't sure which was worse, that they were using the money again, or that they had forgotten who gave it first. I heard Isolde's heels clicking on the hallway floor before she called my name. Marjorie, can we talk in the living room for a minute? Her voice was unusually composed, even measured. I knew that tone. I'd used it myself. Back when I had to tell Cassian he couldn't keep the stray cat he'd smuggled into the basement. When I stepped into the living room, Leland was already seated, elbows on knees, holding a stack of papers that looked like they had been printed in a hurry. Cassian was nowhere in sight. The lights were dimmed. A single candle flickered on the coffee table like we were about to say grace. We just need some clarity, Isolde began, standing behind the couch like a teacher about to scold a student. There's been an issue with the joint business account. A transfer, $70,000. I stayed silent. Leland slid the papers toward me. This came from the account Dad set up years ago. It wasn't supposed to be touched. I looked down and saw my name. It was there, in the corner, under a digital signature. I didn't sign anything. I hadn't authorized anything. But there it was, plain as day. Isolde crossed her arms. We noticed it last week, but we didn't want to jump to conclusions. No, I said slowly. You just wanted to wait until you could present it like an ambush. Don't turn this around, Leland cut in, sharper than I expected. We just want to know if you took it. I didn't. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. That account belonged to your father and me. You wouldn't even have that fund if it weren't for what I gave you when you were drowning. Isolde's mouth tightened. So, you're saying this was some kind of repayment? I'm saying it wasn't theft. But the room had already shifted. The air had turned colder, the walls taller. They weren't trying to understand. They were building a case. Leland pulled something else from the folder, a small scarf, one I had knitted for Cassian's last birthday. It was folded neatly, too neatly, like it had been arranged for a photograph. We found this near my office laptop, he said. Isolde chimed in, which, if you've been using, would explain the logins. I haven't touched your laptop, I said, still staring at the scarf. Well, she added with a shrug, Cassian said you're always trying to bring things into the house. Things we didn't ask for. Maybe it just got misplaced. Or planted, I said, still calm. Whatever makes your story cleaner. She recoiled slightly. That's not fair. None of this is, I replied. Leland looked away. This isn't about the past anymore, Mom. It's about what's happening now. You've been difficult. I almost laughed. Difficult? Is that what they called surviving here? I haven't touched the account, I repeated. And if you believe I have, then you're accusing your own mother of stealing. From the hallway, Cassian appeared, his face blank. He didn't say a word, just stood there, eyes flicking between us like a child trapped in a courtroom without knowing who the defendant was. Isolde took a deep breath. We've already consulted with our attorney. You're not listed as a legal partner on the business. That money is technically a company asset. And technically, she continued, we could press charges. Leland didn't stop her, didn't even flinch. He just sat there, watching me like he was waiting for a confession that wouldn't come. My chest didn't tighten. My eyes didn't well. If they expected a scene, they were going to be disappointed. All I did was nod once and walk back to the guest room. I sat on the bed for a few minutes, hands in my lap, the house humming around me like it was pretending nothing had happened. Then I opened the drawer where I kept the scarf's twin, the one I hadn't given yet, the one I'd been saving for winter. I folded it slowly, carefully, and placed it beneath my sweaters. I looked in the mirror. My reflection was the same, but my role in this house had changed completely. This is not the ending. They thought they'd cornered me, but I've been cornered before, and I always find the door. Isolde stood in the doorway with arms crossed and a practiced stillness in her eyes. You'll need to pack, she said, as if she were suggesting I turn down the thermostat. Tonight. I blinked, unsure I heard her correctly. Excuse me? She didn't repeat herself. She simply stepped aside, revealing a small suitcase already zipped and waiting by the stairs. My suitcase, the same one I brought in weeks ago, now reduced to a single breath of fabric and grief. Leland stood a few feet behind her, not saying a word. His face was tight, unreadable. You can't be serious, I said, my voice too calm for the fire beginning to stir in my chest. Leland finally spoke, but his words weren't apology. They were procedure. We think this is best. For everyone. For everyone but me, I answered. They didn't argue. The ride was silent. Leland drove the car like he was delivering a package he hoped wouldn't speak. We passed through downtown, the lights of Austin casting long shadows across the dashboard. He didn't say where we were going, and I didn't ask. When he finally pulled over, it was 2 blocks from Pease Park. A thin line of trees separated the street from the open lawn. He didn't look at me. This is as far as I can go. As far as you're willing to go, I said, stepping out. The suitcase thumped onto the sidewalk behind me. He drove away before I even shut the door. I stood for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or scream. Then I started walking. The benches were mostly empty, save for a man asleep under a flannel blanket and a couple huddled near a dim lamppost. I found a spot that didn't look claimed and sat down. The air was colder than I expected. I pulled my coat tight, wishing I'd grabbed my scarf, the one still folded in the drawer beside the others I hadn't had time to give. My phone buzzed once, low battery. I tried calling Velda. No answer. Odette. Straight to voicemail. I stared at Leland's name, thumb hovering. I pressed it. This number is no longer available. Blocked, blocked, blocked. The silence was louder than any dial tone I'd ever heard. Morning came slowly. The kind of slow that feels like a punishment. I made my way to the park's bathroom, washed my hands and face, and stared into the mirror. My reflection was older, yes, but it was still mine. The same face that raised a child, buried a husband, and held families together when no one else wanted to. I sat back down on the bench. My stomach grumbled, but the vending machine near the restrooms needed cash I didn't have. A young man pushing a coffee cart rolled by, calling out softly, "Coffee? Fresh pastries, day-olds, $2." I didn't answer, but he stopped anyway. Rough night? I nodded. He handed me a wrapped croissant. On the house. My grandma used to call that emergency food. I nearly thanked him out loud, but the words got caught. I held the croissant like it was the warmest thing I'd touched in hours. By mid-morning, I was walking again. Not fast, just enough to feel like I was going somewhere. The bus stop wasn't far. I passed a school, a bakery, a quiet bookstore I once took Leland to when he was 9. Every step felt like memory bleeding into cement. When I reached the corner, I sat on the bench and pulled out my phone, now blinking red at 4% battery. One number still came to mind, one I hadn't called in years, but that was burned into me like my own birthday, Ansel Reed. I opened my contacts and tapped the name. It rang once, twice. Voicemail. I waited for the tone. "It's Marjorie Smith," I said softly. "I need help. It's about my husband's account, and I think it's time I finally tell the whole story." Then I hung up. I had nothing but my name, my story, and one person who might still remember who I used to be. Ansel's call came just after sunrise. His voice on the line was the same as I remembered, steady, professional, with a warmth he didn't try to oversell. "Marjorie," he said, "you caught me off guard. It's been a long time." I sat on the edge of Velda's guest bed, one foot curled under the other for warmth. "I wish I were calling for a catch-up." "I figured," he replied. "Tell me everything." So I did. The freezing car ride, the silent drop-off near Peace Park, the accusations, the missing money. I listed each part like facts in a deposition. No tears, no embellishments, just the truth, plain and unvarnished. When I was done, he exhaled quietly. "Can you come in today?" "Yes. Bring anything you think they forgot you had." After we hung up, I stood in front of the suitcase I hadn't unpacked and began to dig. It was mostly clothing, a half-used planner, a pair of shoes I no longer liked. But at the bottom, tucked inside the side pocket, behind a stack of old Medicare forms, was a cassette tape. The label was faded, but unmistakable, Harlan's handwriting. I held it up like it might dissolve if I blinked. I searched the house until I found Velda in the laundry room. "You don't happen to still have a cassette player, do you?" She tilted her head. "I think there's one in the hall closet. I used it to play my dad's sermons on tape." 10 minutes later, I sat cross-legged on the guest bed, player in hand. I pushed the worn button, and after a few seconds of crackle and hiss, I heard it. "If you're hearing this, Marge, something's gone wrong." My breath caught. It was his voice. Calm, paced, just slightly hoarse, the way it always got when he was tired. "I created that account so you'd always have something, even if I was gone. Not the boys. You. It's in your name because I trust you to know what to do if anyone tries to use it for their own good. Family or not." I sat still, letting it play through twice. Then I rewound it, listened again. No ambiguity, no confusion. The money was mine to protect. By early afternoon, I was walking up the steps to Ansel's office downtown. His assistant gave me a once-over, but said nothing as she led me in. Ansel stood as I entered, extending his hand. "Marjorie, have a seat." I pulled out the cassette, handed it to him. "You'll want to hear this." He listened with his eyes narrowed and head slightly tilted. When it ended, he sat back in his chair and tapped the side of his pen. "You're not just a co-owner, Marjorie," he said. "You're the primary on that account. I can file a temporary freeze today. Call it pre-litigation preservation." I nodded. "Do it." He began drafting immediately. Paper shuffled, keys clacked. I signed where he pointed. As I left his office, he stopped me at the door. "They're not going to like this." "I'm counting on that." Walking back to Velda's, my legs ached more than usual, but I didn't mind. My steps were heavier, yes, but they were mine again. And with each one, I remembered the moments that had led to this. The dinner table where no one set a place for me. The photo on the wall where I'd been cropped out. The voicemail that never came. Each moment a dot. Now they were forming a line. And for once, that line pointed forward. When I reached Velda's porch, I sat for a long time, watching the wind play with the wind chimes she hadn't taken down since last fall. I remembered every time someone had spoken over me, quieted me, reworded my sentence before I finished it. Not anymore. They counted on me staying quiet. They forgot who raised their voices to begin with. That morning, I didn't have to ask Ansel for updates. He called as I was finishing my second cup of tea at Velda's kitchen table. "It's done," he said. "The court approved the freeze. By now, they know." I didn't ask what time it was scheduled to hit. I didn't need to. At the same moment, on the other side of town, Leland and Isolde were hosting what they'd called a low-key appreciation brunch. Their backyard was dressed in pale linens and floating citrus water. A flute quartet played softly under a tent. I imagined the clinking glasses, the strategic laughs, how it must have felt to stand there and believe everything was going your way. And then it wasn't. Around 11:30, Leland checked his phone. It must have vibrated in his pocket just as he was mid-toast. I pictured his pause, the flick of his thumb unlocking the screen, the way his face must have drained color when he read, "Assets frozen by preliminary injunction, Smith versus Smith." A minute later, Isolde's phone lit up too. Unlike Leland, she didn't freeze. She spun. She whispered. She smiled too wide. She told someone it was just a clerical thing. But the tone had already shifted. Word travels fast, in rooms full of curated reputations. "Is something wrong with the business?" one guest asked. "Nothing serious," Isolde answered with a wave of her hand. "Old paperwork. We're working through it." But then someone said it. My name. "Does this have anything to do with Marjorie?" And that's when the questions began. Not loud, not direct, but persistent. Wine glasses paused midair, phones tilted under tablecloths. One man whispered, "Didn't she help them with their down payment years ago?" Another added, "I thought she was living with them. What happened?" I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. The tremor I'd started moved without me. Leland slipped away from the crowd, pacing near the edge of the garden. He called me. I saw the screen light up. I let it ring. He tried again. This time, he left a voicemail. "Mom, please, can we talk? This has gone too far. I didn't mean for just... Can we talk?" I saved it. Not because I needed it for evidence, but because I needed to remember the sound of his voice when the world he built on omission finally cracked. By the time the brunch ended, the whispers had grown teeth. One guest left early. Another canceled a pending contract. Isolde tried to reset the mood, but no one laughed at her jokes. That's the thing about branding. Once the illusion slips, there's no slogan strong enough to patch it. I stayed where I was, at Velda's, on the back porch, watching the clouds shift colors above the trees. The tea in my cup had gone cold, but I didn't notice. I didn't need heat to feel satisfied. Velda came out with the kettle, refilled my cup without asking. "They called?" she asked. 37 times, I said. She didn't react, just sat beside me and listened as the wind passed through the wind chimes. "They thought I'd never stand up," I murmured. "They thought if they pushed hard enough, I'd break." Velda didn't speak. She didn't need to. I added softly, "I didn't yell, I didn't scream, but I moved the ground under them." The sun began to dip behind the roofs. Lights clicked on across the neighborhood, one by one, like silent applause. I didn't need to be at that party to be the most unforgettable person in the room. The calls began just after dusk. At first, I thought it was a robocall, some unknown number flashing across my phone screen. I ignored it. Then another came, and another. By the 10th ring, I stopped checking the names. I just let them echo, one by one, lighting up the screen and disappearing into silence, 37 times. They must have felt the shift, not just the money frozen, not just the brunch turned sour, but the weight of something they hadn't expected, resistance, from me. I didn't answer a single call. When the morning finally broke, through the slats of Velda's curtains, I sat at the edge of the bed, holding my phone like it might bite. The screen was still, no new voicemails. I almost welcomed the silence, until a message pinged from Ronan, their lawyer. Not Leland, not Isolde, their mouthpiece. "Mrs. Smith, my clients would like to propose a private settlement. If you withdraw the injunction, they will agree to reinstate your name on the account and release a formal statement to clarify the misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. I let the word roll around in my mind like a bad flavor. This wasn't a clerical error. This wasn't poor communication. This was erasure. A few minutes later, I moved to the kitchen, where Velda was slicing fruit with the kind of precision that only someone with patience and arthritis can manage. "They offered a settlement," I said. Velda paused, then nodded. "Figured they would." "It's not an apology." "Nope. They're not sorry." "Nope." She passed me a slice of pear. It was crisp and cold. I walked to the window and watched a squirrel dart across the fence, back legs kicking with full abandon. That squirrel didn't know how good it had it. Freedom, no accounts, no lawyers, no sons who weaponized silence. I thought about the time Leland had chicken pox, and I spent 4 nights in a row sitting by his bed, keeping a cool rag on his forehead and reading stories to him while he itched and whimpered. I thought about helping him through college applications, watching him get rejected from the school he wanted, and encouraging him to try again. I thought about the check I wrote to keep his business afloat, never once asking for anything in return. None of that was in the court filings. None of it mattered now, but it mattered to me. I went back to my room and sat with the phone in my lap, staring at the message. Then I opened my contacts, scrolled to Ansel's name, and pressed call. "Decline it," I said when he answered. There was a pause. "Are you sure?" "I am." Another beat of quiet, then his voice, low and sure. "Understood." I played the voicemail from Leland again, the same one he left the night of the brunch, his voice cracking on the word, please. I listened 3 times, then I deleted it. It was time to stop replaying moments that had already ended. Later that afternoon, Velda asked if I wanted to walk to the market with her. I almost said yes, just to feel normal, but instead I shook my head. I need to write something. She nodded without question and went about her business. I sat at the old desk in her den, where the sunlight hit at just the right angle to make dust sparkle in the air. I pulled out a yellow legal pad, the kind Harlan used to keep next to his recliner, and uncapped a pen. The first line came easy. My name is Marjorie Smith. The next lines were slower, but steady. I wrote about the loan, the account, the tape, the dinner with no chair. I wrote about the scarf in the drawer, the calls that never came, the photo with me cropped out. I didn't write it to be believed. I wrote it because it was mine. They wanted silence. I'm giving them the record. It started with a headline. I was halfway through folding laundry at Velda's when my phone buzzed. Not a call this time, just a notification from a news alert app I hadn't used in ages. Family finance influencer under investigation for misuse of funds. I tapped the article, expecting a name I didn't recognize. Instead, right there in bold, Isolde Martin. The article outlined concerns raised by clients, irregular transactions, use of personal funds masked as professional investment strategy. Allegations, not yet charges, but serious enough to start the fire. By the time I finished the article, my hands had gone still on the fabric. A mug of tea sat forgotten on the windowsill, cooling in the late October breeze. It was happening. Not just the freeze, not just the brunch fallout. The whole thing was cracking. Finally, publicly. I scrolled to the comment section. Normally, I wouldn't, but curiosity pulled me. She always seemed too perfect. Never trusted her vibe. Didn't she push her MIL out of the house? That one hit. Because it wasn't speculation. It was truth trying to claw its way back into the room. I went to check my voicemail and found one from Odette. Her voice, weary, but firm. I tried to call you 3 weeks ago, Marge. Isolde answered and said you weren't available. I knew something was off. I should have tried harder. I'm sorry. I sat still, phone in my lap. Then I pulled up my call history and really looked. Missed calls. Names of friends I hadn't heard from in months. Not one made it through. They hadn't stopped calling. Isolde had stopped them from reaching me. Isolation, it turned out, had been curated. My thoughts were interrupted by another call. Unknown number. I didn't answer. A few seconds later, a voicemail. Isolde. Marjorie, it's all unraveling. We didn't mean for it to get this far. What do you want from us? What do you need to make this stop? I played it twice, then called Ansel. She wants to meet, I said. Ansel didn't hesitate. Do you? No, I answered. She knows where to find me. Courtroom 2A. Later that afternoon, I brought the binder to Ansel's office. Years of receipts, photos of checks, a printout of that account with Harlan's name and mine. I handed over the cassette, his voice steady and irrefutable. Ansel skimmed through it all. You built your case. They built their brand. He slid the affidavit across the table. This next step is yours. I signed. The pen didn't shake. By the time I returned to Velda's, the sky had darkened, clouds thick with autumn weight. She was already in the kitchen, humming something from a hymn I hadn't heard since I was a girl. She handed me a mug that read, "History isn't rewritten, it's refiled." You okay? she asked. I looked at the steam curling from the tea. I'm not angry, I said. I'm awake, and I meant it. They wanted to erase me from the story. Instead, I wrote the next chapter in ink. The courthouse hallway was colder than it needed to be. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, and polished shoes clicked against the tile as if tapping out the rhythm of judgment. I walked past them. Isolde first, then Leland. Neither looked up, neither spoke. I didn't expect them to. Their lawyer nodded at me, tight and formal. Ansel, on the other hand, placed a hand gently on my shoulder and whispered, "You ready?" I was, not because I felt strong or certain, but because I was tired of waiting for someone else to name what I already knew. Inside the judge's chambers, there was no shouting, no theatrical objections, just the soft shuffle of papers and the even tone of an official who had seen it all before. Ansel laid out our documentation like it was linen on a table. The judge flipped through each page slowly. The bank logs, the notarized statements, the audio transcript from Harlan's tape. At one point, the judge paused, raised an eyebrow, and looked toward Leland's counsel. No response, just a slight shake of the head. When the review ended, Ansel turned to me and murmured, "They won't contest this anymore." It should have felt like a victory, but all I felt was quiet. That evening, Velda and I sat on the porch again. She had gone up into the attic earlier and now returned with something wrapped in a linen napkin. "Found this while sorting through old papers," she said. Inside was a yellowed envelope. No postage, just my name in handwriting that immediately pulled me back into a decade I could still smell. I opened it slowly. A photo slipped into my lap. Leland, not more than 1 year old, curled in my arms on a checkered blanket. Harlan was behind us, one hand resting on my shoulder. The corner of the print had faded, where a thumb must have held it many times. On the back, scrawled in ink, barely holding on, "Our World, 1992. I didn't cry. Later that night, as I sat in the guest room with a cup of lukewarm tea, my phone buzzed. A message from Leland. No apology, no real words, just, "I hope you're okay." I stared at the screen, then at the photo, and then I deleted the message. I wasn't looking for an apology anymore. I had outgrown the idea that healing had to come from the ones who caused the wound. The photo, though, I kept that. I placed it gently on the shelf above the desk, facing outward, not hidden in a drawer, not framed for vanity, but resting as a record. The next morning, as I flipped through the final pages of the court filings, Velda looked up from her crossword. "Would you ever let them back in?" she asked. I took my time answering. "I don't know," I said, "but I know I'm not waiting for it." I placed the ruling into a binder, one without gold embossing or leather trim. It wasn't for display. It was for the drawer, for proof. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be framed, seen, and left on the table. The lock clicked with an easy turn, and I pushed open the glass door. Morning light spilled into the room, washing over shelves still smelling faintly of varnish. A paper sign taped to the door read, "Open today." Below it, in smaller handwriting, "All are welcome." I turned on the lights. One by one, they blinked awake across the small space. A converted sunroom Velda had once used for quilting. Now it was Harlan House, a place for stories that last. The name was stenciled in neat dark lettering above the checkout table. It had taken me 2 weeks to pick that font, and almost a lifetime to earn the right to use it. By mid-morning, A few neighborhood mothers wandered in, coaxing their children through the shelves. No one asked for my credentials. No one questioned the donation jar labeled, "Leave what you can." A little girl picked out a worn copy of Charlotte's Web and hugged it to her chest like it was gold. I was restocking the biography section when I heard the mailbox rattle. I stepped outside and found a small envelope resting inside. No stamp, just my name written in crayon. Inside, folded twice, was a note. "I miss your pancakes. Can I come to your library?" Cassie. I sat down right there on the porch step, note in hand, the morning sun warming my legs through my skirt. I didn't cry. I didn't run inside to call him back. I just held the letter for a long while, then folded it again and slipped it between the pages of my journal. That afternoon, the library stayed quiet. Just before closing, I spotted a familiar figure on the sidewalk. Leland. He slowed as he reached the window, looked in, and kept walking. No knock, no wave. Just a man passing a chapter he used to belong to. Isolde never came. That, too, was its own kind of closure. Around 3, a boy came in, holding his little sister's hand. They walked straight to the corner where I had laid out a cloth mat and beanbags. I helped them find a picture book about dinosaurs. The sister couldn't have been more than 5, and the boy, maybe 8. He looked up at me when I knelt to shelve a book. "Is this your place?" he asked. I smiled. "It is." "Did it used to be your house?" I shook my head. "No, but I made it mine." He thought about that for a moment, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Later, as the sun dipped and the last visitors left, I went to the shelf above the fireplace. There sat the old family photo, Leland as a baby in my lap, Harlan's arm around us. The ink on the back had faded, but I knew every curve of it. Our World 1992. Next to it sat Harlan's last letter, still folded neatly, never reread. A child once asked me, "Is that your family?" "Yes," I'd answered. And also, "No. It's part of the story, not the whole thing." I left the photo where it was. At closing, I walked slowly through the library, checking the shelves, dusting the spines with a cloth, tucking chairs back into place. The ritual of order had its own piece. I picked up a chalkboard slate near the door and wrote in clear print, "Your story matters, even if no one ever says sorry." Then I locked the door behind me, not bitter, just certain. Forgiveness wasn't something they earned. It was something I no longer needed to wait for. The lock clicked with an easy turn, and I pushed open the glass door. Morning light spilled into the room, washing over shelves still smelling faintly of varnish. A paper sign taped to the door read, "Open today." Below it, in smaller handwriting, "All are welcome." I turned on the lights. One by one, they blinked awake across the small space, a converted sunroom Velda had once used for quilting. Now it was Harlan House, a place for stories that last. The name was stenciled in neat, dark lettering above the checkout table. It had taken me 2 weeks to pick that font, and almost a lifetime to earn the right to use it. By mid-morning, a few neighborhood mothers wandered in, coaxing their children through the shelves. No one asked for my credentials. No one questioned the donation jar labeled, "Leave what you can." A little girl picked out a worn copy of Charlotte's Web and hugged it to her chest like it was gold. I was restocking the biography section when I heard the mailbox rattle. I stepped outside and found a small envelope resting inside. No stamp, just my name written in crayon. Inside, folded twice, was a note. I miss your pancakes. Can I come to your library? Chakikises, ichion anin. I sat her down, unhind forward, right there on the porch step, note in hand, the morning sun warming my legs through my skirt. I didn't cry. I didn't run inside to call him back. I just held the letter for a long while, then folded it again and slipped it between the pages of my journal. That afternoon, the library stayed quiet. Just before closing, I spotted a familiar figure on the sidewalk, Leland. He slowed as he reached the window, looked in, and kept walking. No knock, no wave, just a man passing a chapter he used to belong to. Isolde never came. That, too, was its own kind of closure. Around 3, a boy came in holding his little sister's hand. They walked straight to the corner where I had laid out a cloth mat and beanbags. I helped them find a picture book about dinosaurs. The sister couldn't have been more than 5, and the boy maybe 8. He looked up at me when I knelt to shelve a book. "Is this your place?" he asked. I smiled. "It is." "Did it used to be your house?" I shook my head. "No, but I made it mine." He thought about that for a moment, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Later, as the sun dipped and the last visitors left, I went to the shelf above the fireplace. There sat the old family photo, Leland as a baby in my lap, Harlan's arm around us. The ink on the back had faded, but I knew every curve of it. Our World 1992. Next to it sat Harlan's last letter, still folded neatly, never reread. A child once asked me, "Is that your family?" "Yes," I'd answered, and also, "No, it's part of the story, not the whole thing." I left the photo where it was. At closing, I walked slowly through the library, checking the shelves, dusting the spines with a cloth, tucking chairs back into place. The ritual of order had its own peace. I picked up a chalkboard slate near the door and wrote in clear print, "Your story matters, even if no one ever says sorry." Then I locked the door behind me, not bitter, just certain. Forgiveness wasn't something they earned. It was something I no longer needed to wait for. Sometimes the loudest truth is the one told in silence. I didn't need a grand speech or a courtroom victory to reclaim who I was. I just needed to stop waiting for permission, to be remembered, to be valued, to be called by my name. Life, especially in the later chapters, isn't about who stays. It's about who still stands. And I'm still standing. If you're watching this and you've ever felt overlooked, erased, or quietly pushed aside, I see you. You're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to write your own chapter too. What would you have done if you were me? Have you ever had to choose between peace and self-respect? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Type 1 if this story touched your heart. Or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't like it, let me know why. I'm here to listen. And if this video found a place in you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. We've got more stories waiting to be told. Yours might be one of them.